I think now that I'm looking at it, this up here is a little bit too high, so it feels like the ear is a little bit too far up. So I'm just going to bring down this lighter color with that backlighting effect, and then come slightly down with a little bit of a darker color to kind of just adjust that. So I'll get that really nice, warm, light color with that cadmium yellow and titanium white. I'll just drop that down a little bit further, maybe just a tiny bit lighter in value. And I'll come back in with that darker orange, yellow-orange mixture right here. Just a little bit lighter in value there. I think I'll start maybe doing a couple sharper edges in a few spots. This darker, maybe a little bit darker than that actually. Maybe using a little bit of my alizarin and transparent oxide red. Just getting some sharper edges in a couple spots around here. I'll switch to a little bit of a larger brush. I'm going to do some of those fun, sharper edges. Over here on the left side. This is the hog bristle, just because it's the, I don't have a Legion in this larger size. They're a little bit smaller brushes. I'm just trying to get those larger brush marks. And you can still, if you use enough paint and you hold your brush like this, kind of very flat against the canvas, you can still get some nice brush strokes that leave a lot of paint without picking up any of the underlying layers. It's more when you're holding your brush like this at this angle. So if you want to really load that brush up, you can get those nice thick strokes. It's really fun to have all these like soft passages of paint where there's those really nice soft edges, and then there's maybe a couple sharp edges here and there. And that's what I was really trying to develop. And you kind of have to plan that out because you want to be able to come over top with those sharper brush marks if you want that kind of finishing stroke. So then you have to plan out and say, okay, if I want this thicker brush stroke on the top layer, I need to go a little bit softer and a little bit thinner underneath so I can get that thick paint stroke at the end. So you just have to keep that in mind if you want to get those nice thick brush marks in there. You might just hint at a couple strands of hair that are catching the light. And I think I want to kind of counterbalance that. These over here with maybe just a hint over here. Hint of something. I'm going to shape up just a little bit more. There. There's a nice accent of a cool color. A purpley blue, a little bit lighter up here. I'll just define a couple little strands and larger masses of fur down here. Just very soft. Might be a little bit too strong, so I'll just tone that down slightly. And then over here, I want to kind of do the same. Well, a couple of those larger masses. Pull it up into there. A couple of these shapes. Noticing, I think this is the shape here. I'm going to adjust that slightly. I feel like it's just a little bit too flat feeling. And it doesn't read quite well. So I'll just kind of soften that transition a little bit and then work into it just slightly. Now I'll switch to probably my smallest brushes that I have now, which are 2s and 4s. And I'll really get into these finishing marks for some of these features like the tongue, the nose, and the eyes. Wow, time goes fast. A little bit too light in value, so I'll just adjust that down. This is a tricky one because I don't want to bring too much attention to the tongue, but I just want to suggest it. So I really want to just try and get a couple brush strokes to hint at it without it being overpowering, because it can kind of look weird if you put too much attention on something like a tongue. It can be tricky. Hoping to develop just a little bit of light that's kind of catching on the edge right here. And then maybe some of the cooler kind of purpley blues that are showing up right in here. I'll come in with just a little bit of a lighter color, and that'll help. A little bit of that lighter hair right here. And that'll kind of help show the edge of the tongue. Maybe just right here, I can bring the shape over. And just a couple hints of lighter color now that I'm kind of working to here. A couple of lighter strands here and there. Adjust the shape a little bit more. Maybe soften it slightly. Feels a little bit sharp over here. Maybe bring down the shape slightly. Its value a little bit darker. Softer on the edge. just really trying to finalize these subtle areas. I take a couple of brush strokes to adjust something here and there. I want to make sure it reads correctly. You need to go just a little bit lighter in value right there. Down here, it's a little too dark right here. I'm just going to adjust that. And I might hint at the eyelashes, kind of the shape. Not painting the individual, but looking for that overall shape of color there. And the same over here. It'll be a little bit lighter on this side because it's catching more of that light. When I looked at it in a mirror, I just noticed there's kind of this shape is sticking out just a little bit, so I'm gonna adjust it. That shape of the light right there. It's a little too strong. This there. Just that down. I'm just gonna add a little bit of kind of a almost warm glow to the eye. Just a tiny hint of it. And it's going to be a pretty dark value because the eyes are almost one of the darkest spots of value in the whole painting. So I want to make it a pretty dark mixture because I don't want it to stick out too much. But I want to try and give a little bit of life to these eyes by just mixing in a vibrant warm. And I might just, even though there isn't that much of a highlight in the reference, I'm going to push it just slightly. I'm just going to put a tiny little highlight, and it's going to be almost a neutral, maybe about the value of kind of this area, not a pure white, because that would really that'll really stand out too much because there aren't too many reflections in this case, but in certain references where there is a really bright highlight, you can certainly use a much lighter highlight. But I'm going to try and keep it pretty reserved in this case. Just a really subtle highlight in those eyes. Adjust this down just a little further. I'm just going to soften a couple of these areas by just kind of holding my brush like this and kind of dragging very lightly just to get some really nice soft edges and some interesting texture with that kind of that linen texture showing through slightly. It's nice to have all that different variety of application of paint with the thicker strokes, these kind of softer areas, the sharp strokes, and then I'll come in with some palette knife towards the end. And then I might scrape a couple of these little whiskers in to give it a little bit more character and just suggest it very lightly. Noticing one thing I forgot to get in, just kind of the dark around her mouth and then just a hint of the bottom of her mouth there. I'll just very lightly suggest it because it's all in shadow. So I don't want to overdo it and have too obvious of a value transition when it's all in shadow. But I'll just suggest it down here. Can just do something like that. Might be a little bit too much. So I'll just soften that. And then I'm thinking over here, I want a little bit of a softer transition. So I'll work these two areas into one another. And there's a couple little fun shapes of fur and hair that I think I'll just hint at. I'll try and find that flow that connects all these shapes together. here, just hinting at a couple of those darker value shapes that are created by the hair. Maybe I'll just hint. I don't want to go too light. That nice cool color and just hint at the edge right here. Might need to come over just a little bit further actually. Right there. Try and put a couple slightly thicker strokes over here, maybe. Just building up some nice paint texture. Getting that nice soft appearance down here as it fades off the canvas. Just going to come back and adjust the nose a little bit more. Just getting some of the values a little bit more accurate here. anybody has any questions at this point, I'd love to answer them since we're kind of coming to a close the last 10, 15 minutes or so. In my palette now. Then I'll get some fresh color mixed up with the palette knife and put a couple fun finishing palette knife strokes on.
Jared, when you did the wash, what did you use to make the paint more liquid?
I used Gamsol. It's Gamsol.
I got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jared, I'm going to be using acrylics. Do I approach it basically the same way that you've done here?
Yes, I would say so. It's going to vary a little bit since acrylics dry quite a bit faster and it sets up faster.
Open acrylics.
Okay, open acrylics. Yeah, I've used those before, and it gives you, I think that gives you enough working time to approach it kind of in this style where you're starting with more of a wash and then you build up to that thicker paint and you kind of blend wet into wet.
Okay. This will be my first time using the open ones.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think you'll like them because I've used them in the past and they have a nice working time compared to the regular acrylics.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know what open acrylics are. I just use regular acrylics, the Liquitex heavy body.
Mm-hmm.
What is an open acrylic?
I believe they add a medium, or I don't know if there's medium in it or it's just the way they make it, but it has something that slows the drying time a little bit so you can work into it a little bit more. So it doesn't dry as fast and it gives you a little bit more time.
You can find those like at Jerry's Autorama or something, because at my local art supply store doesn't have that. Maybe Dick Blick's?
Yeah, I think Dick Blick's or Jerry's Artorama would have it. And that's also possible. I believe they make quite a few mediums for acrylics that extend the drying time. So you might be able to use the acrylics you have, but maybe your local store might have something that would extend the working time of the acrylics, some sort of Liquitex medium maybe.
Golden makes a retarder, which is really nice and works really well with acrylics.
Oh yeah, that would work really well. And a lot of these techniques I'm teaching are things that apply to every medium. It's more the underlying foundational elements that I really want to help teach you. But I know there are certain limitations, and there are going to be things that might be a little bit tougher if you're using acrylic, just because it dries faster. So it's harder to get that uniform wet into wet look. But I think if you do use retarders, or if you have the open acrylics, that would probably give you enough working time to get those wet into wet, softer edges. I'm just going to mix up that nice yellow. I'll put a nice thick stroke maybe right here. And I don't know if you all have access to palette knives, but they're a really fun way to add interesting texture towards the end of a painting, because I think it adds that variety, because everything right before that was all just with a brush. So when you start to introduce other ways of applying the paint, it adds a nice effect for the texture and the quality of the paint, I think. So it's fun to experiment with different tools like that can give you different textures and varying thicknesses of paint.
You had mentioned a mirror. Do you have a mirror that you're checking all the way through, or how are you using that?
I'm using it. It's my phone, and it's just the screen's turned off. I don't know if you can see it, but if you hold it at an angle, it basically acts as a mirror in a way. It reflects it. So it's really mostly for the drawing is what I'm using it for, to make sure the things are in the right place. So if I'm looking at it for a while, it might look fine. And then if I hold it up to the side of my face and look through it, I'm seeing the mirrored image, and things will jump out really quickly. And another alternative for larger studio works that I do, I have a pretty large mirror that I can use behind me. And I'll just check every once in a while. I'll just kind of look behind me in the mirror and see if anything looks way off or stands out.
Thank you.
Yeah. And pocket mirrors also work pretty well. I think just like little handheld ones, those come in handy too.
Do you use ever Permalba white?
Permalba white?
Permalba is like a really inexpensive white.
Huh. I haven't heard of that before, but is it, what company makes it? Is it?
It looks like this.
Oh, let me zoom up.
It's made by Weber.
I haven't personally used it, but I'm sure it's
titanium.
Yeah, that would work fine. I think if it's more of a student, sometimes the less expensive paints have less pigment in it, so it can be harder to get the same levels of color. But with whites, I've used a couple more student grade whites, and they've worked pretty well for me. So I think that would work great for you.
Could we see that knife kind of close up once you have it loaded?
Yeah. It's a Richardson palette knife. And when I'm loading it, I try and really control it and get a nice amount of load on the edge where I can know what kind of stroke I'll get out of it. So I'll mix up a nice pile, kind of work it around, and then I'll pick it up on the edge. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of loaded on one edge of the palette knife. And that way I can really control the stroke and get the type of mark that I'm wanting. It's a lot of fun to just play with the paint like this and get nice texture and that variety. And I like to save the palette knife usually for the end of the painting, just because that way the strokes that I put down will stay. Because if I put them down early in the process, then I'll probably end up coming back over it with a brush or something and adjusting that. Whether or not I'm intentionally doing it might just be, if I'm just working in the area, I might mess up the stroke. So if you save it towards the end of the painting, that way you can get that nice fresh stroke and it will stay there because you're not doing more painting after that. And you have to be confident and not be afraid of the paint, because when you let the paint control you and you're scared to use too much of it, it can really weaken the paint quality on the painting. So you have to try and build that confidence and just take control of the paint and not be afraid of using too much or what's going to happen, or if it's going to get muddy. Just be confident with your mixing. And that really helps. And it can also, sometimes it just takes time to build that confidence. And that was the case for me when I was first starting out. I was a little more timid with my application of paint. But as I painted more and more, I got more comfortable with controlling it and not being afraid of it, and really just being bold and having fun with it. Because that's what it's all about in the end, is making sure you're enjoying it and having fun with it. That's really critical, because when you're having fun in the process, people can tell. And I think it just adds a lot of life to the work.
Well, that's 3 hours, everybody. It went by so fast.
It went by so, man. Yeah.
So I got some message over here through text. If you're more of a beginner and feel like this is a bit more advanced, I would recommend you to focus more on the first hour of the workshop to really get the big plans and the big shapes down. Because really, the rest of the 2 hours is just going from big shapes to smaller and smaller shapes to refine it. So I would say focus on one thing and really just get that down. And then if you have to go through a whole bunch of different studies later on, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Simple, big plans, value study. Don't worry about full color yet. Just do value studies until you can really tackle it. And then you can go back to review the rest of the 2 hours and then really just kind of build your skill up like that. And then also tomorrow, I'll talk to Kai to focus more on the texture, because he'll be doing a cat. So it'll be really nice and fluffy. So we can focus more on the texture while we focus more on the form today. On this beautiful dog portrait. That way you get a full, understanding of how to build the form and then create the texture, because that's what is so fun about animals, is that fluffy texture.
Yeah.
So if you have any last minute questions, now it's time to ask. And if not, we'll get the video ready. And later on, you will just, once we upload it, you will log into Sentient Academy. You will see the course in your library, and that's how you will be able to access it. I'll make sure I put out the reference photo and I'll type up all of the colors on the palette. That way it's easier for you to know what is used in here. And then Jared, I'll get the list of the brushes that you use. The shape and the sizes so we can have that available for them.
Yeah.
And then later on, you can take a nice photo of this painting and we'll put that up in the course too. That way you have all of the resources ready for you.
Yep. Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. You guys did awesome. Bye. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.